Today we're going to go over some control structures in Python. We're going to show you how to generate a random number and control the flow of the program using an if statement. We'll also show you how to iterate through some of your code using a while loop or a for loop. So random numbers are one of those ones that you don't want to do just by yourself. Instead, we're just going to use an import statement to import random. And all that does is imports a couple of functions that lets us generate random numbers without having to come up with an algorithm by ourselves. In this situation, I'm setting a variable called die1 equal to my random number. That way this could represent maybe a dice in a game or some sort of thing. The object we're using is random, and the function we're using to generate the number is randrange. So I put a dot in between there. So that's this object dot, this is the function. Now in this, there's two numbers you have to give it. You have to give it the low, meaning what number is the lowest number of random number you might have. Well, in the dice, the lowest side is a 1. Now the next number is up to. It's not the high. It's you want it to go up to, but not including this number. So for a dice where we want it to end at 6, I actually have to specify 7, because 7 will not be in the range at all. That will be up to that number, but not including. So if I were to print this die out in the screen, I might get a 3, I might get a 5, I might get a 1. It would be different every time you run your program. You might even get a 6, but you will not get a 7. So that is random numbers. Now when we start doing some control structures, we're going to need a couple of operators. Now some of these are obvious for math. So this first one up here, that is the greater than sign, and then you've got the less than sign. Here is the tricky sign. Is if I just use one equal sign, it says assign a variable a value of whatever it is. So I can't use one equal sign to compare, because otherwise I'll be assigning the value. Instead, I use two equal signs to compare to see if two things are equal. Which maybe I want to compare to see if two things are not equal. So I use an exclamation equal. And then we also have greater than or equal to and less than or equal to if we wanted to compare both of those things. Now I can use those operators in what's called an if statement. An if statement executes statements if the expression is true, and it skips statements if the expression is false. So here I have an if statement I got a little Star Wars reference for us. If the force is less than 10, we want it to print out Jedi hopeful. If I have a variable force, and maybe it's a random number, maybe it's an inputted number, but if it's set to 50, 50 is not less than 10, so it would not print this statement at all. Now a couple of things I want you to observe on here. You do have to have a colon after your condition. The parentheses are not required. I put them in because other languages have them and I like them there. You don't have to put them in there, and I'll sometimes forget them too. But they are not, parentheses not required, colon is required. The other item that's required is this tab right here. This print statement is tabbed over once or twice, or maybe it's just 5 spaces from this if statement. And that indicates to the compiler that this line of code is part of this if condition. Now if you have multiple statements, you are required to put that tab in on each of those statements that are in this particular if condition. Colon still required. Forgot that. Yep. Okay. Now, if I have that same if condition, but the second print statement is no longer tabbed over, that means that no matter what, it's going to print this statement. It's not dependent upon this if condition. Only this first statement is dependent upon the if condition. Colon still required. I keep putting that in because I keep forgetting it, and I'm going to keep forgetting it, so I'm reminding you. All right. Okay, tab is required. Okay, here is another situation. We have an if statement. We have what's called an else that can go along with that if statement. You can't just put an else statement out by itself. It has to be associated with an if statement. And what that does is this else gets executed if this condition is not true. So suppose they have a force variable of like 12. 12 is not less than 10, so it's going to skip this, and no matter what, it's going to execute this command right here. Okay, still have to have the colon. And if I ever back tab my statement accidentally, it means this print statement is not in the if-else condition, and so it will get printed regardless. See how it's lined up with these? All right. Okay, now an Elif command is a weird and strange word that doesn't look like it means anything, but it does. It's just an abbreviation for else if. So it can't be the first statement. You have to start with an if condition. But if this is not true, it will go and continue to find statements that are true until it finds one that is. And if none of the elif conditions are true, it will execute the else. So in this condition, if this if statement, if our variable force is equal to 5, it will run this condition right here, and 5 is less than 10, so it will print out Jedi Hopeful. Now suppose that our force variable is 12. It's going to come in, this is a false statement, so it will run and check this statement. This is now true because 12 is less than 25, so it will print out Jedi Padawan, and then it will skip over the rest of these conditions. All right. Next, suppose it's like 75. 75, it's going to execute our else condition because none of these are true. If it was 30, 30 would come here. 30 is not less than 10. 30 is not less than 25. 30 is less than 50, so it would print this and skip everything else. So that is what an if-else if condition looks like in Python. Now you can combine two Boolean operators, two statements, to see if a big long statement is true, and you can use that using the words or and. Now this works just like it does in English, but I'm going to give you the formal definition and then my example. Okay, or returns true if one of your statements is true, and returns true if all of your statements are true. Okay, your teacher says to you, get an 80% or higher on the, no, that's a bad example. How about your mom says to you, clean your room or do the dishes and I will buy you a car. That's pretty steep, but you know. She said, clean your room or do the dishes and I'll buy you a car. Are you going to clean your room? Or are you going to do the dishes? Would you have to do those both because she said or? Now same situation, and she says and clean your room and do the dishes, I'll buy you a car. Maybe it's not a car. Car's kind of steep for doing the room and doing the dishes, but you get the idea. So in that situation, you would have to do both of those. Both of those would have to be true in order for you to get that reward of the condition in there. So let's show you some examples of this. So I did this using random numbers just to kind of show you some random. So I imported random, and I have a die 1 and a die 2 that are terribly equal to, that's not correct, right? Because our random range has to go up to, but not including that 7. So now it's a variable between a random number between 1 and 6. In this if statement, I say if die 1 is equal to 1 and die 2 is equal to 1, still have to have my colon, but I've combined these two conditions. So even if die 1 is 1, it might not print this unless die 2 happen to be 1 as well. So in this case, if they roll double ones, that's snake eyes, and it would print out snake eyes. So and combines to make sure both conditions are true in order for it to execute the code that's inside, that's tabbed over inside the if condition. Oh, and now I have animations to show that there are two statements there that are combined with the and. Okay, now I have an or example. In this situation, I have a die total, and the die total is equal to a random number between 1 and, once again, I wanted, if I'm doing dies, I should get this right and put my 7s in, because That is what our random range goes to, right? Okay, so my die total is going to be one dice plus another dice, and that's going to equal the total number of dice put together. So if my dice total is a 7, or if you roll an 11, that's craps in the game craps, and so that's where this example is coming from. Now, if they roll a 6, it's not either one of these, so it's going to skip both of those. Okay, so catch us in the next video and we'll talk a little bit about loops and how you can repeat segments of code.